The Ottoman Empire, once a rising star among Muslim dynasties, faced one of its greatest tests in the early 5th–10th century. Following the catastrophic defeat of Sultan Bayezid I at the hands of Timur in 1402, the empire fractured into competing spheres of influence. Powerful regional rivals and former vassal states quickly took advantage of the weakened central authority, reclaiming lands that had once flown the Ottoman banner. It was not only a territorial loss, but a symbolic one. The idea of Ottoman invincibility had shattered. Cities like Bursa, Amasya, and parts of the Balkans saw shifting allegiances, while the Karamanids in Anatolia and Christian powers in the Balkans capitalized on the empire's internal disarray. The Ottomans were no longer the feared force they had once been. They were vulnerable, divided, and surrounded. With Bayezid I imprisoned and later dead, a civil war erupted among his sons, leading to the infamous Interregnum period. For over a decade, the Ottoman princes Suleiman, Isa, Musa, and Mehmed fought not just for the throne but for survival. During this time, the empire's territorial grip slipped further. The Karamanids reclaimed major strongholds in central Anatolia. Serbia and Wallachia moved to secure independence. Byzantine territories that had once paid tribute saw a window of freedom. Even Venice began asserting more control over maritime trade routes once dominated by Ottoman ports. The Ottoman state was bleeding, not just from the outside but from within, and the dream of a unified empire seemed to be fading. It was Mehmed I, the most strategic and patient of Bayezid's sons, who emerged victorious from this civil war. After defeating his brothers one by one and becoming sultan in 1413, he inherited not a mighty empire but a broken shell. Yet Mehmed I did not see defeat, he saw potential. His first goal was not expansion, but restoration. Before claiming new lands, the Ottomans needed to reclaim what was once theirs. It was a bold ambition, but one that would set the foundation for the Ottoman Golden Age that followed. The first challenge was domestic. The Karamanid beylik, a powerful Turkmen principality in central Anatolia, had been a constant rival of the Ottomans for generations. During the civil war, the Karamanids had expanded aggressively, taking Konya and surrounding territories. Mehmed I understood that fighting them immediately would risk plunging the empire back into instability. So, he took a diplomatic approach. He offered marriage alliances, leveraged tribal connections, and delayed open conflict until he had restored order in the western regions. It was not a sign of weakness but of patience, a strategic delay that allowed him to stabilize his court and secure key allies. In the Balkans, the threat was more complex. Serbia had supported Musa Çelebi during the civil war and now found itself in a delicate position. Mehmed I, understanding the cost of prolonged war, reaffirmed old treaties and gave nominal autonomy to Serbian rulers so long as they paid tribute. This restored Ottoman suzerainty without draining the empire's military. Wallachia, ruled by the ever-defiant voivode Mircea the Elder, was another challenge. Rather than attempt a full-scale invasion, Mehmed focused on reinforcing Ottoman control in Bulgaria and along the Danube, thereby containing the threat and signaling a slow but steady return to dominance in the region. One of Mehmed's most critical moves was the restoration of Edirne as the primary administrative center. Though Bursa held symbolic importance as the old capital, Edirne was strategically closer to Europe and better suited to control the Balkans. Re-establishing governance from Edirne allowed Mehmed to project power westward, resume tax collection, and reassert legal authority over rebellious governors who had tried to declare independence during the Interregnum. Through a combination of military inspections, religious endorsement from scholars, and reappointments of loyal governors, Mehmed began sewing the empire back together, territory by territory, law by law. Mehmed's restoration efforts weren't just external. They targeted the psychological wounds of war. public morale was low. Cities had been devastated. Confidence in the Ottoman state had declined. To address this, he commissioned repairs to mosques, caravanserais, and roads that had fallen into ruin. Scholars were invited back to the madrasas. Trade routes were reopened with tax incentives. Artisans were given royal support. In a short span of time, the empire began to look like itself again, not just to the Ottomans, but to their neighbors who watched nervously as the empire stood up from the ashes. By the time of Mehmed I's death in 1421, the Ottoman Empire had not yet returned to its pre-Ankara borders, but it was no longer crumbling. It was rising. His son, Murad II, inherited an empire that was stable, respected, and primed for expansion. And that expansion would come. Murad would follow in his father's footsteps, not by immediately conquering new lands, but by continuing the project of restoration. Under Murad, the Ottomans would retake Thessaloniki from the Venetians, push further into Albania, begin reasserting dominance over rebellious Balkan lords. The empire was not just healing, it was preparing to grow stronger than ever before. The restoration of Ottoman control over key territories was not achieved in one grand campaign, but through a sequence of calculated moves, each rooted in diplomacy, patience, and strategic clarity. It required the leadership of rulers who understood that sometimes the greatest conquest is not of land, but of trust, unity, and identity. When Mehmed I died in 1421, he left behind a kingdom that had been healed but not yet whole. The task of completing the restoration of Ottoman control over its lost territories now fell upon his young son. Murad II, only 17 years old when he took the throne, Murad inherited a delicate empire that had been stitched back together through diplomacy, strategic marriages, and limited conflict. But the threats surrounding the Ottoman heartland had not disappeared. The Christian kingdoms of the Balkans were testing the limits of peace. The Karamanids were once again stirring unrest in central Anatolia. Venice continued to exert pressure over key coastal regions, while Hungary and Wallachia watched for weakness. Murad II did not have the luxury of peace. His reign would be defined by war strategic, relentless, and ultimately victorious. The first major threat came not from an external rival, but from within. A rival claimant to the throne emerged in the form of Mustafa Çelebi, a half-brother of Murad who had previously been imprisoned in the Byzantine court. With Byzantine support, Mustafa landed in Rumelia and declared himself sultan. Many soldiers and governors, still unsure of Murad's youth and capability, defected. It was a severe test for the young ruler. But Murad acted quickly and decisively. He rallied loyal troops, used propaganda to denounce Mustafa's foreign backing, and crushed the rebellion. Mustafa was captured and executed. This early victory not only solidified Murad's claim, but also sent a clear message to internal and external enemies alike: the Ottomans were done with fragmentation. With internal threats subdued, Murad turned his attention to the Balkans. The region was a patchwork of shifting allegiances. During the Interregnum, many Christian states had enjoyed relative independence. Murad saw this as unfinished business. In 1430, he launched a successful campaign to retake Thessaloniki from the Venetians. The city, a vital port and a symbol of regional dominance, had been under Venetian control since 1423. Murad's forces besieged it and eventually broke through, forcing Venice to abandon its stronghold. The fall of Thessaloniki sent shockwaves through Europe. It was the first major Ottoman victory since the Interregnum, and it marked the beginning of a renewed Ottoman push into the Balkans. Following this success, Murad pursued a careful but firm policy with the Balkan kingdoms. Serbia, Albania, and Wallachia were each approached with a mix of force and diplomacy. In some cases, he reinstated tribute agreements. In others he placed local rulers who were loyal to the Ottoman state. These actions re-established suzerainty without requiring full occupation, allowing Murad to expand Ottoman influence without overextending the military. This was critical in a time when the empire was still recovering economically. Murad understood that the real restoration of power did not come from occupying every inch of land, but by controlling the flow of tribute, trade, and allegiance. Meanwhile, in Anatolia, the Karamanids were once again challenging Ottoman authority. Under Mehmed I, the Karamanid threat had been managed diplomatically. But Murad had no patience for repeated rebellion. In 1435, he launched a series of campaigns to break their power. Unlike earlier engagements, Murad's campaigns were swift and ruthless. Karamanid cities were besieged, their armies scattered, and their leadership forced into submission. With their defeat, central Anatolia was once again firmly under Ottoman control. The heartland of the empire had been secured. No longer would local beyliks threaten the unity of the realm. The Ottomans were now positioned as the dominant power in southeastern Europe and western Anatolia. But the greatest test of Murad's leadership came in the form of a grand Christian alliance. Alarmed by Ottoman gains, the Pope, Hungary, and various Balkan states formed the so-called Crusade of Varna in 1444. It was a well-funded, heavily armed effort to roll back Ottoman expansion and reclaim Christian lands. Led by Władysław III of Poland and John Hunyadi of Hungary, the Crusaders marched deep into Ottoman territory. In a surprising move, Murad abdicated the throne to his young son Mehmed II, perhaps hoping that his abdication would weaken Christian resolve. But when the Crusaders advanced on Varna, Murad returned to lead the army himself. The Battle of Varna would become legendary. Facing a larger and highly motivated Crusader force, Murad commanded his army with precision and discipline. At a critical moment, Władysław III led a charge toward the Ottoman center, hoping to break their lines. Murad stood firm. His janissaries held the line, and the Christian king was killed in battle. The Crusader army collapsed. Murad had not only defeated one of the most powerful Christian coalitions of the time, but he had done so after stepping away from the throne and then returning purely for war. This victory cemented Ottoman supremacy in the region and silenced doubts about the empire's military might once and for all. After Varna, Murad resumed the throne and continued a policy of measured restoration. He reinforced borders, appointed competent governors, and laid the groundwork for future conquests. But more importantly, he ensured that the next generation of leadership would inherit an empire that was not merely restored, but redefined. Murad's efforts ensured that his son, Mehmed II, would not inherit a fractured state like he had. Instead, he would inherit a unified, disciplined, and battle-hardened empire, one ready for greatness. By the time Murad II died in 1451, the Ottoman Empire had fully regained control of its lost territories. It had reasserted dominance over its rebellious vassals, reclaimed strategic cities from foreign powers, and restored its legitimacy in the eyes of both its enemies and its people. What had begun under Mehmed I as a cautious and fragile effort to hold the empire together had been transformed by Murad into a bold project of reclamation. The Ottomans were no longer in survival mode. They were ascending. This restoration laid the foundation for one of the most transformative events in world history, the conquest of Constantinople. Just 2 years after Murad's death, Mehmed II would march on the Byzantine capital and fulfill a dream that had haunted Muslim empires for centuries. But that triumph was not born in a single siege. It was built over decades of careful restoration, disciplined leadership, and unwavering resolve. Without Mehmed I's healing hand and Murad II's military brilliance, there would have been no Ottoman Golden Age, only a forgotten dynasty lost to history.